Welcome to Talking Buffalo, featuring conversations with guests from around the world of sports, media, pop culture, and all things Buffalo, with your host, Patrick Moran.
All right, what is going on, everybody? How you doing? Welcome to another episode of Talking Buffalo, your weekday daily driver for Buffalo sports talk and more. My name is Patrick Moran. Thank you very much, as always, for watching, for listening, for following, for subscribing. Appreciate y'all very much, and would like to invite you, if you have not yet followed Talking Buffalo, especially on Apple or Spotify, please make sure that you go do that right now. I'm joined right now by a good friend of mine, recurring guest, almost used by habit, the tagline from a place that we're going to talk about here in just a couple minutes. But my guy, Anthony Marino, man, what is going on? How you doing?
Hey, it's good to be back. I say it every time when I miss a week with you because of other stuff going on, but it's like, gosh, you skip a week. It feels like, where did we leave off with our conversations and pieces? So I don't like missing. So I'm happy to be back.
You know what? You are right too. It is weird because you weren't on last week. You were traveling at work stuff. So yeah, it does. It feels like it's been a minute, man. It definitely does. And it's only been 1 week, but I guess that's what it's like when you get into routines. Well, during your absence, a player got traded from the Buffalo Bills that a lot of people know about. I'm going to get some thoughts from you on that because we haven't talked since that. Kind of want to take a little bit of an examination, and this is obviously going to be nothing more than just our own personal opinions right now. There's a lot of stuff out there. Kind of want to take a little bit of a dive, so to speak, into why we think that maybe Stefon Diggs just simply wasn't as happy, at least during the last maybe year or so, during his time in Buffalo, as it feels like he should have been when you factor in so many different things that would make you think, this guy hasn't made being a Buffalo Bill, but just kind of what went wrong and why wasn't he happier? I kind of want to talk about that today. We're going to resume our finish the sentence segment. I always like doing that with you. It's kind of like an opportunity to give fans of the show a chance to know a little bit more about yourself and me to a certain extent as well, beyond just, like I said, just beyond the Bills talk and stuff that we do each week. I do got to say this, though, before we get going. If you're watching this on the video side, I'll pull it up. The photo. In fact, I'll pull it up right now. All right. So last week you're in Albany and you went to the Iowa game and you met one of, I know, your favorite actors from one of your favorite TV shows of all time, Jason Sudeikis. On the video side, I got a nice family photo of you with him, which, by the way, you tower over him. And Jason ain't no small dude either. He's like 6 foot, 6'1", something like that. I actually looked it up. Talk about this photo. Talk about how you met him at this game and just like that whole experience here.
Yeah, it was an amazing day. And like Ed said, I was traveling during the day on Monday, making sure we got back in time for the game. And this was the Iowa LSU game, right? Which was the most anticipated game of either tournament, bar none, in my opinion, right? The rematch of last year's women's national championship game. The hype going into it was amazing. I've been fortunate to go to a lot of great sporting events in my life. So to be at that game, it felt like a championship game atmosphere. Like it was, you're just sitting in your seat. Like, I can't believe I'm here. And so we're there that night. We're fortunate. And we had bought tickets like well in advance, right? We didn't know what teams were going to be coming to Albany. You get all session passes. And then all of a sudden it's like, oh my gosh, like South Carolina's coming and Iowa's coming and LSU is coming. And all these great teams are coming into Albany for this 4-day plan. Mm-hmm. Right. So we're there that night. We're like 10 rows back, center court. To our right are all the Iowa parents. To our left are all the LSU, parents and families, right? Like it's right behind each of their benches and we're at center court. Now, early in the game on the Jumbotron in front of us, they're showing some folks there and they put Jason Sudeikis on the Jumbotron. So immediately my son is like fixated on just like, okay, what was he wearing? And let's try and find where he is in the arena. So we keep looking. I mean, literally he spent, I feel like, every timeout, every break in play trying to find Jason Sudeikis. And then finally, right towards the end of the game, we had some friends sitting on the other side. They said he's kind of in front of Caitlin Clark's parents. So they were directly to the right of us and he was to the far right. So we're looking in all these areas, not knowing he's in the section right next to us, about 10 rows before us. So the game ends, celebration happens. You know, they're pulling out the ladder to cut down the net because that means Iowa's going to the Final Four. Mm-hmm. So a lot of the Iowa parents are going down on the court to be with their family. So you see a couple people going up to Sudeikis and maybe he's taking some photos with them. But there's that weird moment of just like, am I really going to walk up there and introduce myself to a celebrity to take a photo? You know, I'm 49 years old. He's there enjoying himself. You're caught up in the moment, whatever. Right. But again, he's right there in the section next to us. Well, my 13-year-old daughter's like, I'm going. And all of a sudden we look and there's my daughter, Sadie, standing next to Jason Sudeikis. Now he has his back to her at the time. He was chit-chatting with someone else real quick. I see my daughter start talking to someone, take a selfie with this person, a woman. And I'm just like, oh my God, turn around, Sadie, like you're going to miss your chance. Then she starts talking to Jason. He gives her a hug. They take a photo, all this stuff. She comes up. She's like, yeah, that woman was his sister. She was so nice. Like she made sure, she's like, just stay here. He'll totally take a photo with you. Well, then my other two kids were just like, well, we're going. Like, so basically then the five of us go down. There was no one kind of in front of us. We went up, obviously recognized my daughter from like a minute beforehand. He's like, hey, you again. And we just had the nicest, like, you know, brief interaction conversation with the celebrity that you will have. He was as nice as could be, taking pictures, chit-chatting with all of us. It was just, you know, and sometimes when you meet a celebrity, it could be a little awkward, a little off, right? Like you don't, and he really couldn't have been nicer, not just to us, but to other folks. A friend of mine, Kevin, took that picture and I was like, Kevin, come on over. And he was like, yeah, Kevin, come on, let's do this. Like, he was just really in a great mood and just as nice as could be. So, I mean, the game itself was amazing. That to cap off the night was incredible and just a special moment for our family from start to finish.
Yeah, you know, it's really cool to get a chance to meet somebody, like I said, that you really admire. Ted Lasso, we've talked about it many, many times on the show. I know it's one of your favorite TV shows of all time. So to not only get a chance to, you know, to meet the main person from a show that you love so much, but also it turns out that he is a really, you know, chill dude, a really nice guy, because sometimes there's some celebrities out there and, you know, doesn't mean they're bad people, but maybe you catch them at the wrong moment or the wrong day and they just don't really want to give you any of their time. And, you know, you kind of get like you said, a bad interaction or experience from it. So to be able to meet like one of your heroes, so to speak, is really, really cool. And as for that game, dude, you're there, Elite Eight. I mean, this was one of the most hyped women's college basketball games that I could ever remember seeing in my entire lifetime. I mean, I was watching it, of course, and I was also following along on Twitter, and it was just completely dominating the headlines. What was it like? What was the vibe actually being in the arena, not just for a game that was like really hyped coming in, but a game that like quite literally lived up to that hype? Because a lot of times you might go to a game and it might be two great teams or great players and it kind of doesn't live up to what the hype is, but it certainly did. Like all the talk about Caitlin Clark, man, lived up to it. It was that was just a phenomenal game. And
yeah, there was a sense of adrenaline in the building, and I don't know if it was the crowd feeding off the players or the players feeding off the crowd. And the end of the first quarter, the score was 31-26. Yeah. Right. I mean, that's a pace to be, I was doing the math, like 124 points for LSU and 104 points for Iowa. Right. So when two teams come off like that, I mean, you knew this was a proving ground type of game. You know, Iowa wanted to avenge last year's loss. LSU wanted to prove that, you know, they were still the national champs. And again, not Iowa coming in and knocking them off. I will say this, the level of play throughout the entire weekend, such a high level of play, a high level of passion. I got to say this, like, and when you're there in person, you get a better appreciation for the play. Angel Reese, fantastic basketball player. Fantastic basketball player. And I know she's a polarizing figure. I think the things that she has gone through and others is just ridiculous, the way fans can react to players. We talk about it with NFL football players, but to, college athletes and some of the things that they go through. I just hate all of that. Right. But you're watching it and it was just like, man, both of these teams are playing like this is the national championship. And they did. And it lived up to all of it. And, listen, we were there rooting for Iowa. My daughter that's 13 years old idolizes Caitlin Clark, as many young girls do. So to be there, to have them win and to have her come out and, like, when she hit that first 3-pointer, it was just like, okay, this is going to be one of those all-time performances for her. And it was.
Yeah. Caitlin Clark has really elevated the sport, and it's great to see. You love to see it. I mean, this is kind of a rhetorical question here, but I'm sure that ranks really high in terms of sporting events that you've been able to see live in your lifetime. Off the top of your head, is there like one or two other ones that you could think of that you've been, again, maybe we're not comparing it to necessarily this one, but one or two of, like, maybe the coolest sporting events that you've been to live? I didn't think of this beforehand, but as you're talking about this game, this vibe, and like I said, this was just completely dominating national sports headlines. I'm trying to think in my mind, like, what's a really cool game or moment that I've been to? What are a couple others for you?
Yeah, there's 4 that come to mind, and I was thinking about that beforehand. So 51-3 was my first Bills game I ever went to. So that in itself, right? But again, I was like 14, 15 years old at the time. Like, you don't even have an appreciation for that. Later on in the same building where the Iowa LSU game was, Syracuse won in the Sweet 16 and then the Elite 8 to go to the Final Four with Carmelo Anthony, Jerry McNamara, Akeem Warwick, before they went on to win the national championship that year. So that was a cool moment to be there, although didn't have that same electric feel. And then just the last piece, and again, it's not on that same level, but I was in the Carrier Dome. Basically, Jerry McNamara hits a buzzer beater to win the game over Notre Dame. And just, when you're there, 30,000 people, to experience a buzzer beater at the end, that's pretty remarkable. But as I talk about all of those things, I mean, it's kind of 51-3 in LSU, Iowa. I mean, I realize there's some recency bias here right now, but that is from everything that game was, from Caitlin Clark's performance to just it being the national storyline for a week. That was pretty cool.
Yeah, for sure. I think off the top of my head, I was at the arena when Brad May scored and the Sabres swept the Bruins in the playoffs. That was the famous Rick Jeanneret Mayday call. I was actually in the arena for that, but I was young. Then the other thing, and I guess, I don't even know, some people won't even consider it a real sport, and it's not, it's entertainment, but I was in Toronto for WrestleMania 18, and it was the year The Rock and Hulk Hogan wrestled, and the crowd was the loudest. I've been to plenty of Bills games, not recently, but I've been to plenty of Bills games. I've never in my life heard a crowd louder than I did for when The Rock wrestled Hogan. Just, it was weird, man. Like, the whole crowd became Hulk Hogan fans. He was supposed to be the bad guy, and it was just crazy because the crowd went nuts. So that was really cool being there for that. Before we get to some Stefon Diggs stuff, I on a serious note, like, we're talking about good times here, reminiscing about great sporting events that we've been witness to, meeting really cool celebrities that live up to what you hope they're going to be. Bad news, sad news for yourself, a lot of people over at Buffalo Rumblings, many of which I've come to like and know through the years now. Vox Media announced or just pulled, I should say, Buffalo Rumblings, the podcast, the network itself, the podcasting portion of Buffalo Rumblings is unfortunately now no more. Obviously, you had a show on there. my man Bruce Nolan, the Bruce exclusive. Like I said, Jay Spence, Joe Miller, so many other ones. Not Another Buffalo podcast, something that I just recently discovered over the last couple weeks and became a instant fan of, man. Those three guys are really good together. They got some chemistry. Really enjoy their content, and I will continue to enjoy their content. But anyway, it goes without saying, and I know this is sad news for you. Just I don't know, I got you on the show, so I'd be remiss if I didn't ask for your thoughts on all this that's went down with rumblings over the past week. Vox Media.
Yeah, it's obviously it's unfortunate, right? You think of all the folks that you just mentioned and others, some really good people that have been putting out good content for a long period of time. And really, we started this network back in like 2019. It was right before the draft. Matt Warren had asked me if I would, was doing a show for Buffalo Rumblings, but would take this and build this into something, that we would have content throughout the week. And begrudgingly, I remember at the time, I was like, all right, man, I don't really know anything about this, but let me give it a stab. And it was really before then. I mean, he had his show, Buffalo Rumblings Q&A, Nate Auble, who does Circling the Wagons, John Boccacino and I had done the Believe show, and I was spinning off to do Breaking Buffalo Rumblings. And it was just like, okay, let me kind of find some other shows out here that we can really build this up. And the first one that I found, just very, very random, from the Cleveland Bills backers group was the Nick and Nolan show, which, Bruce Nolan was a part of. And I was just like, my gosh, these guys are fantastic. And was able to add them to the network. And then some things really started to take off, right? Jamie D and Big Newt, two guys that I've, just love what they would have on the air. And then Jay Spence comes on, and Joe Miller and John Fina, and you talk about Not Another Buffalo podcast. I mean, it became this really fun group at a time when, podcasting, if you think back 5 years ago, was not what it is today.
Nope.
It was, you're the OG, but it was kind of like from that standpoint, there were some things that were out there, but nothing like what it is now. And I don't say this in a bad way, but every beat reporter, every TV broadcaster, they all have their own podcast now. So it became a very, very crowded space.
Yeah.
But we were always very proud of what we had created because, we'd pull up the numbers and sometimes hey, we're in the top 50 for football podcasts across the country, or the top 100, or hey, we're in the top 10 in Tokyo. I have no idea how or why, but when you realize people across the globe are listening to your shows, that was something I took a lot of pride in, and a lot of really, really good people to be a part of that. And it was about 2 years ago, Vox cut a lot of their podcasts, and we stayed at Buffalo Rumblings. I mean, it's kind of like a humble brag, but we were one of their top 3 or 4 podcasts across all of their sports platforms. And that's a testament, again, to all the guys and girls that had done the shows over the years. So when they stuck with us, it was just like, okay, hey, we made it through this. And then just out of the blue, got a message. We kind of have this group chat. Someone's like, did you get that email? And I'm like, what email? But I obviously knew probably what it was. And then we all got the same news, and here we are today. So it's a weird feeling because I've been a part of Buffalo Rumblings for such a long period of time.
Sure.
So it's just, but it's a business. It is what it is. You just, you got to move on. And honestly, to help the other shows, if they're looking to become a part of another network or do their own thing, I mean, we'll still support each other because it's just good people.
Sure. Blindsided, honestly, was this something?
Oh yeah.
That you guys, as far as I know, I talk to you, we talk off the air and stuff like that as well. So I had no inkling from you that something like this might be coming. I talk to Bruce consistently, weekly at least, sometimes a couple times a week. And it felt to me like, and Joe Miller's another guy that I talk to relatively regularly. I got no sense anyway from anybody that something like this was coming a couple weeks before the draft too, which is even more odd. This is one of the busiest times of the year for content in terms of podcasting. But anyway, this was a for lack of a better term, this was a blindside, wasn't it?
Oh, it was. And, and I should say this too. I mean, there are folks that this was their full-time profession, right? Working for SB Nation. So, for everybody on Buffalo Rumblings, it's a hobby or an aspiration or something
Sure.
that you do to,
Side
have a
piece,
little
little
fun
side
in
piece.
that piece.
Sure.
So I don't want to forget, some really good folks, especially Mike Kist, who was part of the Bleeding Green Nation Eagles podcast in the past, and kind of in a full-time role, really guiding so much of the growth that had taken place. Mike, a great guy, and really helped us all a lot. So yeah, it was a complete blindside to all of us, at least.
A lot of people at Rumblings are, in terms of podcasting, life, everyone's going to be fine. All right. If you pick yourself up, you go on to whatever is next. It's not life and death. But anyway, in terms from a podcasting point of view here, Bruce is going to have endless options. Bruce Nolan can join any network that he wants, quite frankly. I'm sure the guys that cover one would love to have him. I'm sure there's going to be a lot of opportunities, a lot of options out there for him. Joe Miller, who, by the way, hosts the show, not just him, but he has the John Fina show as well. That was a popular Rumbling show. I wouldn't be surprised to see, I know he's got the Overreaction Sports. Like, there's a lot of separate RSS feeds now coming out, kind of starting from scratch in some ways, but it's obvious that Joe's going to continue, to do his own thing. I'm sure Jay Spence, the same as well. Some people we don't know about. I know that Not Another Buffalo Podcast has their own RSS feed. So, by the way, so just give you a little bit of credit here, and shame on me for not knowing about those guys earlier. But so you kind of, you're like, you're the backstage agent who kind of discovered them and brought them to the network, right? I really like those guys, man.
I love those three guys. And I say that, like, again, just from their show, it reminds me of, me and my friends from college or growing up, and it's like, gosh, if podcasting was a thing back when I was as young and aspirational as they are, but they have such a great rapport with each other. They don't take themselves too seriously, which, a lot of times folks do take themselves way too seriously with some of this. And, and listen, that's fine. But they even say right from their intro, like, three of the most unqualified people to be talking about this, but they have a great, not just the rapport they have, but their production. Jonathan does a fantastic job with that on the video side, on the audio side. And it just, it's a lot of fun. And it is fun when you discover a show like that and you just genuinely enjoy it, right? Because I think with that, it's like, hey, I'd love to have these guys a part of Buffalo Rumblings because I enjoyed it myself, and you get to do that. And I think for most of us too, right? Like you think they do that show because it gives them a chance to get together as buddies in a virtual space,
sure,
and talk about something that they love and enjoy. And it's not about downloads. It's not about views on YouTube. It's not about, can we get a sponsor or any of this stuff. It's like, this is something you enjoy doing with your friends. And that's why many people should do this. I realize there's folks that have like bigger aspirations, and that's totally great. But for them, that's what it's all about. And I just, I'm glad that they're continuing to do the show because they're really good, man. Like they're really good.
I'm a kind of a nerd when it comes to podcasts. Like, what matters to me a lot is the audio and video, like production values that some people have with their show, how they promote themselves, like on social media. And like I said, with that Not Another Buffalo Podcast, once I actually found out who they were, I'm like, they put together some really good clips. It looks really professional, some really good work in the production aspect of it, which is kind of what made me quickly become a fan of theirs. And, it's funny. One of my jokingly claim to fames with Bruce Nolan is, so like I said, you got him over to the Rumblings Network. I still remember this, man. I remember going through a lot of podcasts, maybe a couple of those, maybe a couple of years into my show, looking for like just talent that I could really enjoy that I didn't already know about. And I'll never forget hearing the Nick Nolan show originally. And I'm like, yo, this dude is really, really good, man. I'm talking about Bruce here, of course. And to this day, I still claim to take 16% of the credit for his rise to popularity in Buffalo, man. I got him on Talking Buffalo. I think it was actually Moran Analytics podcast at the time. And just as people got to listen to him and know him, the gimmick, his voice, obviously his knowledge of the team, of course, it just his personality, like podcast wise, just really took off. And he's one of those guys when I think about the Rumblings era of podcasting that it's just, it was really to like, or really easy to like, I should say. And just one of those guys that's really taken off. And now to this day, and I'm sure again, he's going to wind up wherever option that he wants to do. He's become a fixture, a staple, so to speak, when in the Buffalo podcast community, whether it's alternative media, whether it's mainstream media. He's one of the most popular guys in this space, period.
Oh, yeah. I mean, listen, Bruce is one of one. And that is, he's the total package when, again, everything that you just mentioned about him. And even just the number of spots that he'll do on WGR, right? It just,
sure, it
shows like, okay, here is a guy with a fake name and fake persona based after a movie character. And he's doing like mainstream sports talk radio and a regular, right? That it comes with many of those shows. And just how fantastic is that? Like again, you look at it. I mean, Bruce will, eventually figure out what he wants to do. I hope that he sticks with it because, again, when you are one of one, he brings something very different to the discussion than anyone else does, kind of to what I said before. There's so many conversations out there, right? I mean, even during the season, I'm like, listen, I'm going to take a little bit of time off because I'm not going to be one of 500 shows doing a recap of Sunday's game type of piece. And Bruce has a way of breaking it down and talking about it, which no one can even imitate, right? It's not even something that someone can take and say, oh, I'm going to try and be a version of this. Or if it's out there, I certainly haven't heard it yet.
One last question here, and we'll get into some actual football talk in the back half of the show. But obviously, as long as you're enjoying doing it and your work schedule permits, you'll still be doing this with me here on this show weekly, which I love, obviously, doing that. Have you had a chance yet to give some thought to whether you might want to do your own podcast still, or maybe do some collaborate with other networks and stuff like that? Or is it still a little bit too fresh in your mind and you really haven't had an opportunity to sit down and think about what you might want to do?
Yeah, it's probably a little too soon. I've been, and I say this like, I've been going back and forth with Bruce, just kind of chatting with each other and get an idea of what he's thinking. I think sometimes it's almost a little cathartic almost. And he was giving me some advice, which he is very good at. And I appreciate, was going back and forth with John Corzilius from Not Another Buffalo podcast the other day. And, right now I'm just like, I want to do this because I enjoy it, not because it feels like an obligation or, oh shoot, it's Tuesday. Like, what am I going to talk about? Let me start to prep type of thing. So I would like to take a little bit of time and just have it feel organic, or if it's something where I say like, hey, I really want to do this, but if I'm doing it, it's going to be for me, right? Like I'm not worried about downloads or any of those pieces. It becomes a creative outlet, which is just fun. I enjoy doing this with you each week because honestly, you do all the work. I get to show up and just sort of ramble with you, which is great. But along those lines, it's just it's been a cool opportunity in that you get to meet some people that you never would before. I mean, as you said, I live in Albany, New York. Like you don't get a ton of Buffalo Bills coverage out here from the local media. You get a little bit and that's fine. But then you start to engage with yourself and Bruce and Joe Marino and Joe Miller and Jay Spence and Matt Perino and Talbot and, Sal Capaccio. And you're just like, oh man, it's this fun little network of just guys that love the Buffalo Bills or that cover the Buffalo Bills, and you have some fun with it. And it just, it's a fun hobby and I enjoy it.
All right, let's take a real quick break, come back on the other side, and we're going to get down to some business here. Talk a little bit of Stefon Diggs and his apparent unhappiness with the organization. All right, I am back here with Anthony Marino. All right, so now on the video side, because I've learned something about fans. The bigger your following gets, and this is something I've certainly experienced with this show, 95% of it is great. You get a lot more people that watch the videos now than ever before. And that YouTube channel of ours is just continuing to grow quite literally every single episode. A lot of it's great. But there's one thing that comes with the territory when your show gets more popular is that you invite more critics. People who always got some shit to say, no matter what you do, no matter how much work you put into it. And the biggest one I get on the video side is something that like what we just did right now. This show is conversational. It's designed to be that way, and it always will be that way. So we might spend 10 minutes, we might spend 30 minutes talking about what some people would call small talk. You know what I mean? Before we get into the meat and the bones of what the topic is, which today, Stefon Diggs being unhappy. I'll put on the video side now, like I got to do chapters. So no, like I don't already do enough work. Now I got to put chapters in because a lot of people will come on there, give me a half hour, before bitching and moaning. So I got to like insert the chapter. So on the video side, if you're listening to the first couple minutes, just go to the chapter about Stefon Diggs if that's what you're here for today. I just want to let people know that. And speaking of, again, we don't need to recap the trade at this point. It's pretty much semi-old news. I want to start by asking you this. Why do you think Stefon Diggs wasn't happier? Because it is apparent that he wanted out. It has been very widely speculated, and I'm using that term loosely here, that Stefon Diggs actually asked for a trade. After you go through all the metrics of Stefon Diggs with the Buffalo Bills, man, he is the undisputed number one wide receiver on this football team. He is very handsomely paid. I mean, he got a monster extension just in 2022. He is played with one of the true elite quarterbacks in the NFL. He is playing for a fan base that really, really loved this dude. Certainly wanted to love him anyway, which I will point out as somebody who goes to plenty of the summer training, training camp. Jesus, I'll get it right. I'm thinking of baseball on my mind right now. And as somebody who goes to a lot of the training camp practices and pays attention to like little details, I'm telling you right now. I mean, obviously Josh Allen always gets the biggest ovation. Stefon Diggs, far and away, second biggest ovation from the crowd every single day when he would come on the field. People just went nuts. So anyway, very popular with the fans, the quarterback, and on a winning football team. I mean, this team has won like over, I think, the last 5 years more than anyone in the league. They've won their division 4 straight years. They've won at least one playoff game every year since 2020 now. All these factors. Why do you think Stefon Diggs, point blank, just wasn't happier in Buffalo?
I think there are people, this is a real generalization, right? But there's 2 types of people.
Mm-hmm.
And there are people that maybe they start working someplace, like think in your life, right? Like, hey, and they retire from a place that they've worked for 20 plus, 30 plus years, whatever it may be.
Mm-hmm.
And then there's folks where it might be like, hey, I work at this place for 3 years and then I move on to someplace else and I work there for 3 years. You'll see it all the time, right? Like if you're on LinkedIn, it's like, oh man, didn't she just start a job like yesterday? And it's just sort of and I don't say it in a bad way, like they just bounce from different pieces. And I think that's just like who Stefon Diggs is, right? Like I think it's kind of that you get to a certain point, you get sick of it, and you work your way out. And that's what he's done. I mean, it's almost you can look back at it and say, all right, this is probably what the Bills signed up for. You got 4 great years of production, right? A guy that for all the cryptic tweets and all the stuff that's out there, like at least as far as like putting in the work, the play, the effort, I don't question any of that. I was listening to the Go Long TD pod earlier today before we're recording, and Jim Manos was on saying he's like, kind of like this is who Diggs is. Like, he went in the 5th round because nobody at Maryland would like kind of sign off on saying, hey, this is a guy that's that you want a part of your franchise. Then he gets to Minnesota and, leaves Minnesota. And he even said, like, remember that video they had, like, who's the one guy you wouldn't let your sister date or, watch your kids, or, and everyone answered Diggs, right? And it was a little bit of, it's like jokingly, it's fun, but it's also a little bit like, okay, well, why did like 7 guys in a row say that? And then even with this piece, and it was something, I think maybe it was Rico from Buffalo Fanatics that said it first. And it's funny because I was thinking it, and then Jeremy White was talking about it on WGR, and then I saw and missed a tweet from Rico. But it was like, you didn't really see a whole lot of posts from anybody on the Buffalo Bills currently saying like, hey, best of luck, Diggs. I love you. I miss you. You were great. Deion Dawkins, that was the only one that I saw that had a post on Instagram and on Twitter. And I don't follow all the players. So, I mean, there's a possibility I might have missed something, but usually something will show up as a retweet or a share or something like that. I didn't see any of that. So, right, it's just like, gosh, is this just a guy that kind of wears out his welcome a bit and then moves on? And that is the part to me that is almost the most telling. Now, again, I get it. That's, there's a lot of guys that have moved on too. So it's like, well, you don't have Jordan Poyer or Micah Hyde or, Mitch Morris or Gabe Davis to they're not part of the team anymore. So, there's a kind of a changing of the guard in many ways. But to me, that was really telling, because it's just like, I still haven't seen any of those posts.
I know, I'll say this. I know a couple players, okay? And I also know a couple people who have a couple strong connection to a couple players. And I don't think it's that people don't on the team I'm talking about didn't like Stefon Diggs. I think he's a really, really, really difficult person to work with. I'll say this. Anthony Marino from Cover One. I saw it dropped literally just shortly before we're recording this for tomorrow. I did a Bills mock draft with Anthony Marino from Cover One. And by the way, I'll make sure I plug that. Is a really good show. Man, you want to talk about somebody who can give you like an education on some of these prospects? He's one of those guys. And
it was a great listen.
Yeah, he really is. He's a great listen. Very easy on the ears. But anyway, here's my point. Before we got into the mock draft, we were talking about Stefon Diggs. And he had a comparison that I had never really thought of before. And when you first hear it, you're like, huh? But he used Kobe Bryant as a comparison. Not in terms of, Kobe's one of the greatest 5 NBA players of all time. But Kobe had an unrivaled work ethic. And you could say what you want to say about Stefon Diggs, but the one thing, no matter how much you want to hate on him for not wanting to be here, kind of rejecting Buffalo, whatever way you want to spin that, one thing you cannot take away from him, that dude worked as hard as anybody. Training, and he might not came to Buffalo for OTAs. Dude was always training, always in the lab, as athletes like to say, working his nuts off, man. I mean, this guy is in pristine shape. You don't become, and this is one of the things Anthony pointed out. What do we all know Stefon Diggs as being? One of the greatest route runners you'll see in the NFL. You don't get to be that way without working your ass off, without training. And he had a standard for himself in terms of training that was, like I said, mostly unrivaled. And I think he had that same expectation for everybody. And not everybody puts in that kind of work. That's not to say his teammates are lazy by any means. You know what I mean? But his work ethic and the way he has himself in shape and just ready to play all the time caused a rift to some extent. Now, Josh Allen, I'm not here to say he there's not a bigger competitor in this team, maybe not in the league, than Josh Allen. He wants to win badly, but he unwinds some in the offseason. His offseason mindset might be a little bit different than Stefon Diggs. And long story short here, Anthony, I think that got under Stefon Diggs' skin. And he's not the kind of guy who's going to not say what's on his mind. I think that caused a lot of the rift between those two, which we've come to learn now that their relationship was not all rosy. I mean, it was rocky. I mean, they were tight at times, but they also had some feuds, so some moments where they couldn't stand each other. And Tim Graham on his podcast last week pointed out the opening game against the Jets where Josh Allen was just horrifically bad. He was brutal. Other guys are going up to him, consoling him. Stefon said something, and Josh got in his face and said, it's one effing game. So I think the rift between Josh and Stefon played a big role in ultimately why Stefon Diggs is not here.
Well, and again, you probably know more than I do, right? If I'm speculating, it's just like, okay, for this separation to take place, it has to be something between him and Josh, at least in my mind, right? Because like this is who Diggs is. But again, if Diggs asked for, I don't know, I shouldn't say that because if Diggs asked for a trade, like
he did ask for a trade. Listen,
well, sure, right? I mean, because when Brandon Beane was asked the question,
he didn't deny.
Stefon Diggs didn't ask for a trade. All he had to say was, no, he didn't. Like, we got a call, and it was like, it made sense for us, and he had to dance around it. So I agree with you there.
No.
I just don't know, right? And it's a kind of a weird piece because I'm looking at it right now and just saying, it sucks that he won't be on the Bills this coming season, right? From a talent standpoint. Now, there's still months until the roster has to be set or anything there. So there's still time there. But it just, I think in time, Bills fans will remember the Stefon Diggs 4 years with the Bills fondly. Right now, it just kind of stings because it's just like, for whatever it is, like, yeah, he, if he asked for a trade, he rejected the Bills, he rejected Buffalo, this and that. And it just, you don't want things to end that way, but sometimes it just, listen, you got a future second round draft pick for it.
No.
Could have been worse.
Yeah. Look, I think compensation-wise, I think the Bills actually did good. My first thought was, wow, this is terrible. They got a pick. It's not even this year, which might not end up mattering because that doesn't mean they can't use next year's pick to do something in this year's draft or for a player if it's not, a draft pick. So I got no problem with the compensation. It's just like I said, it took a little bit of time for the sticker shock to wear off on me a little bit. I don't completely agree with you, though. And I think I wish you were right, though. I don't think a lot of fans are going to remember ever Stefon Diggs' time here fondly, even though it deserves to be remembered fondly because this guy literally rewrote the Bills' reception record book during his 4 years. I think he's going to be remembered as a really great player, but a guy who didn't want to be here. And I don't think time is going to time's going to erase that. I really don't.
Well, and you know what? And you might be right. And I think when I look at it, even, just again, for what the team became after Stefon Diggs arrived and, he was part of that ascension, right? And that's not giving one person more credit than the other, but like, hey, for what the Bills were 2019, promising, you come off the loss to the Texans in the playoffs and, should have won that game, blah, blah, blah. Diggs joins in 2020, and all of a sudden the offense becomes one of the most feared, one of the most elite in football. And you can say, Is it Diggs? Is it Josh Allen? Is it Brian Dable? Guess what? It's a combination of all three, right? And all three of these guys can have success in other spots and with other people, and that's all good too. I just think, you look at some of those games and for what the offense became, he was a big part of that. So I'll always kind of have a little bit of a soft spot.
Sure.
A little bit. Like, trust me, there's parts where you're just like, okay, you know what? I defended him enough, and the cryptic tweets and people on, Twitter would get kind of like, I'm done with him. And it's like, listen, it's just a wide receiver diva drama. Like, that's just what they all do. Like, every top wide receiver brings some level of drama with them to this stuff. And like, even some of the things he's like tweeting out there, it's like, we don't even know what that's in context to. Come on. Like, just trying to be that optimistic piece. And then this happens. It's like, shoot, I guess I was wrong. I definitely didn't think they would, eat the cap hit. And I definitely didn't think that they would, move on from him just, with some of this stuff. And
not this year.
They did. And all right, now it makes this offseason a heck of a lot more interesting than it even was beforehand. So
I've said to the mock drafters out there, I guess anybody who really actually follows and cares about the Bills draft, certainly is going to make the draft more interesting because maybe they don't do anything. Maybe they still pick at 28. Hell, in my mock draft with Anthony Prohaska, all this stuff going on, he still traded down at 28. Got what he wanted. But my point was, yeah, look, man, Stefon Diggs, I think you can make a very good case. He might be the greatest receiver in the history of the Buffalo Bills. He certainly put up the best 4 years, a 4-year stretch of anyone who's ever played for this organization. It's a shame. And now I do believe to some extent, a lot of the stuff that we heard a year or so over the last year seemed crazy. Stefon Diggs saying, or not Stefon Diggs, Stephen A. Smith saying Stefon wanted out. Maybe he didn't know something that in hindsight we didn't know at the time. Devin McCourty apparently telling Tim Graham that it looks like the Bills want to prove that they can win without Stefon Diggs. Maybe there was a little bit something to that. From a football standpoint, though, I got to tell you, man, I'm good with the trade. As time has went on, I'm good with it. It is a little bit tough though to lose Diggs and Gabe Davis in the same offense or in the same offseason. That's a lot. I do think also maybe Poyer and Hyde and Trey White, a lot of their leaders, Mitch Morse being gone, guys who, there's only so many people in that locker room that probably had the clout to say, yo, Stefon, shut up. You know what I mean? You're crossing the line. You're going over the line right now with whatever it is you're saying. Those leaders gone. I think it could have been a bigger problem. I think Brandon Beane knew that too. And maybe that's part of the reason why he ultimately made this move. But from a football standpoint, man, I'm all right with it. I really am. What are you thinking about free agents, trades, draft capital?
Here's my thing, though. And I'm not one to overreact, right? I try to be really even-keeled with this stuff. I am not sure about how good this team is going to be next season. Fair. And that is this Stefon Diggs piece, Mitch Morse, Jordan Poyer, Micah Hyde, Trey White, not just as players, right? When you talk about leadership. And I don't really, I get it. Diggs was a captain and, kind of as a leader on the practice field and those types of pieces. And that's where when we get to the conversations and people say, well, do you make an Atlanta Falcons type of trade up, the Julio Jones type of trade? Like, I don't know how high the Bills pick is going to be in the 2025 draft. Like, I don't know. I don't know that I look at this roster right now and say, yeah, of course they're the favorites for the AFC East. I don't know. I mean, listen, you fill some of those holes and I get that piece, but for the first time in at least a few years, right? I'm feeling a little like, and again, it is not this is the end. The window is not closed. I'm just saying it's like, yeah, this might be like a wild card year, or this might be hey, maybe you go 10-7 and you just miss the playoffs. I don't know. Like, it's just a little bit of Diggs was a big part of the team's success. And I realize what he was down the stretch, but it's also not it's not like defenses were ignoring Stefon Diggs on the field, right? The production might not have been where you wanted it to be. So I'm just a little bit in that weird place right now. And listen, they could make a trade, and by the time this podcast is released and I could feel completely different, or whatever they do in the draft, something weird could happen or whatever it is. But, I'm just in a little bit of a different spot with it than I was a week ago.
I'll say this. I think it is certainly fair to admit that for the first time in a handful of years, there are certainly a solid handful of legitimate question marks when it comes to this team. You don't know what you got right now is basically what I'm saying. Yeah, look, Hyde and Poyer were not 2021 Hyde and Poyer anymore. Right. But does that automatically mean Mike Edwards and Taylor Rapp are upgrades even over what they had last year? You got rid of Mitch Morse. Is it a lock that Connor McGovern is going to be a really good center? You got question marks there, man. You lose Gabe Davis and Stefon Diggs. And it's not a lock that any rookie, I don't care if it's McConkey, Mitchell, Worthy, Leggett, you move up for Brian Thomas Jr., it is no lock that they're going to come in as rookies to this organization and be as good as Stefon Diggs has been, even Gabe Davis has been over the last 3 to 4 years. So I certainly feel like it's fair to at least have concerns and question marks about this team. I want to ask you one last thing too, because again, this is dropping Tuesday morning, which puts us like 16 days out now from the actual NFL draft itself. You've followed along. You've studied up some on some of these receivers. I know you listen and read to what people that you respect, what they have to say as well. Have you gotten to a point right now where there's a couple of receivers in this draft that like you would be really happy to see the Buffalo Bills potentially land?
It's funny because you get to a point where almost like just address wide receiver, not to just say like I don't care who, because that's not it. I'm not a fan of the idea of trading up in the Julio Jones style of things. I think that's giving up too much draft capital.
Do you want to know how much? Do you want to know how much? I'll let you know, because we kind of did the math, the chart research. If you're talking a Julio Jones type trade, let's say you're talking realistically the highest you're going to get, even to say like 8, maybe 9. Chicago at 9 feels like a good spot to go make your nutty trade. You're talking a first this year, a first next year, a second next year, and probably like a third for a fourth swap. So for people out there who are wondering when Anthony's talking about moving up all the way up, that's what it's going to cost you. Sorry, didn't mean to cut you off.
No, and that's fine. I mean, the one guy, Xavier Legette is the one that I look at right now. Okay, a little bit of a late bloomer. Mm-hmm. I don't look at that as a bad thing. I say because he's a late bloomer and having this productivity in his 5th year, that is the reason why he can be available at 28, as opposed to, hey, if he had done this for 2 years or if he was a year younger or whatever it is, like he's potentially going, top 15, something like that. I look at him as like that blend of size, speed, athleticism, hands, you name it. But it is interesting, right? After you get past the first 3, there's some real varying opinions on this next group of wide receivers, whether you're listening to Robert Mays and Nate Tice on the Athletic Football podcast that they do. You hear who they're talking about, Dane Brugler from the Athletic, Joe Marino from Locked On Bills. Like, you get into like Brian Thomas Jr., some of these guys will say like, hey, he's a top 12 pick. Others are saying he's a fringe 3rd rounder. Like, and the same thing with Xavier Legette, Xavier Worthy. Like, there's a lot of variance that comes with those players. So it's going to be really, really interesting.
So Anthony Brahaska and I, our latest mock draft, he was thinking Javon Baker would pick 60 the whole time. And as the board played out, it turned out that Xavier Legette was actually available at pick 60. And my first thought was, come on, man, we're trying to get this realistic. Truth is, Anthony, we see this every year. We don't know. You don't know. Like, Torrance was a first rounder in plenty of mocks last year. I remember Cordy Glenn being a first round pick in a lot of mocks, and the Bills got him in real life in the 2nd round. Didn't work out so well with Boogie Basham, but I remember Boogie Basham going very late in the 1st round in a lot of mocks. So, we're educatedly guessing, but we don't know.
Oh, no. And listen, once you get past that part, and listen, it's always a little annoying each year where it's like, oh, there's only 18 players with 1st round grades in this one's draft. Well, it's like, you know what? There's 32 picks. So how about you just the first 32 guys have a 1st round grade? But it was, that year, Peter Schrager mocked Boogie Basham to the Bills in the 1st round. Heck, in mocks that I had done, I had Creed Humphrey going to the Bills in the 1st round. Ooh. And those guys end up going late in the 2nd round, right? And again, you see how one really worked out. One ended up being a steal, but crazy stuff.
Yeah, for sure. All right, let's wrap up with our Finish the Sentence segment. I kind of want to bring this back, and hopefully we can start doing this again every week. Well, maybe not draft week, but after that. Again, 3 questions each week, just giving people a chance to know a little bit more about Anthony and just his Buffalo Bills takes. So let's kick it off here. In honor of Stefon Diggs getting traded, which did upset plenty, I should say, at least not everyone, but plenty of Buffalo Bills fans right now. Give me a sports trade that left you upset. So a sports trade that left you upset is blank.
I'm going to cheat on this a little bit, and it's going to be about my son, because this was 7 years ago, roughly 7 years ago. He was 10 years old at the time. and really getting into sports like for the first time. Like you saw that passion coming through towards a team. Huge Boston Celtics fan, still is to this day, but he had fallen in love with Isaiah Thomas, the diminutive point guard that was a great scorer for them. And we're out to eat one night, and up on the screen comes that Isaiah Thomas has been traded to the Cleveland Cavaliers for Kyrie Irving. And you see the disappointment, his eyes almost well up just a little bit. And I'll still remember he turned to me and he's like, couldn't they just trade Al Horford instead? Like couldn't they just swap out Horford for Isaiah Thomas? And, just that piece of, again, you're a kid, like he knows who Kyrie is, but not understanding maybe the level of player that he is. But Isaiah Thomas, like, he had the t-shirts, he had the gear. And like, as a parent, you talk about this type of stuff, right? It's like, trades that upset me, whatever. I'm an adult, or I can't think of anything from when I was a kid, but I'll always remember that restaurant where we were sitting at, the look on his face, and we still kind of joke around with him about that today. So that was the first one that really, really came to mind for me. Isaiah Thomas getting traded for Kyrie Irving.
That's a good one. Quickly here, I it's recent too. I'm going to say Jack Eichel getting traded. And I want to be able to clarify this. It's not that I love Jack Eichel. It's not that I think Kevin Adams made a huge mistake by trading him. He had to. It got to a point, there was going to be no reconciling between the two. But it just reminds me of how much I invested in the Sabres at the time and how I sat there and rooted for them to lose the tank year where they were going to get McDavid or Jack Eichel, one of them for sure. And it just really upset me once he was gone, because I got upset at myself for just how much mental energy and time I spent rooting for the Sabres to lose, because I thought Jack Eichel was going to be the guy that was going to completely turn everything around. So my guy's Jack Eichel there. All right, so we talked about the top of the podcast. You got a chance to meet your man, Jason Sudeikis. You got a nice photo with him. My favorite Jason Sudeikis movie is blank.
Horrible Bosses. That movie kind of like hit me out of the blue, was not expecting it to be good. Had a friend that actually had lost his job around the time when that was out on DVD.
Yeah.
I bought the DVD, I wrapped it for him, and I like brought it over. I was like, here, I got you a gift. And it was like, the look of like, what are you doing getting me a gift, like for losing my job? He opened it up, realized what it was, watched it, and it was just a great laugh, almost cathartic. Everything worked out for the friend in the end. But that type of piece, that movie, I belly laughed throughout. And that's honestly, you asking me this, I'm like, I need to rewatch that one because it's been a while.
It was good. Horrible Boss 2, good. Not as good as the first one, but it was it was good as well. For me, it's We're the Millers. I don't know. I really like that movie with Jennifer Aniston as well. All right, last one we'll get in here. A non-Bills podcast I'd enjoy doing weekly. And no, this is not me necessarily foreshadowing what Anthony might end up doing at some point down the road, but just for the sake of it, a non-Bills podcast I'd enjoy doing weekly, or at least periodically, is blank.
I would just love to do something like reviewing movies, right? I mean, I think I've listened to different podcasts throughout of folks that will do different pieces where it's, reviewing just different films, right? I mean, whether it's, nothing, I don't even want to list a specific one because there's various ones that I'll listen to, but, for me, that's something I've always enjoyed. I'd love to go back and even review like stuff that, we grew up watching, and gosh, maybe it's kind of cringeworthy at this point, but to me, that's always been a passion.
Mine, I think, would be, it's not original. I like podcasts about podcasts. You know what I mean? Like for people that are really, that care about podcasts, like the production that goes in on the video side, the audio side, just talking about, having guests on and talking about their process of doing their shows, the work that they put in, what their process is from beginning to end. That might not interest most people, but it would interest me. So it's, in an indulgent way, I would, that would be mine, as well. Anyway, good to have you back, man. Glad to, don't stop traveling. Will you stop going on the road for work? I don't like it. You throw me off a little bit. I don't know what day of the week it is anymore. Although, to be fair, I keep moving around on different days that we're doing this show anyway. But the plan quickly here is do the draft, at least anyway. We're going to go with Monday tapings for Tuesday shows, and then we'll figure out the day that works the best for both of us afterwards. But at any rate, make sure you follow Anthony on Twitter. Don't listen to the Buffalo Rumblings podcast network anymore because unfortunately isn't one. But in all seriousness, man, keep your eyes just on Anthony. And, we'll have updates because you'll be on the show weekly. But Bruce, Joe, Jay Spence, all those guys, I want to give shout out. Sarah Larson, I love Sarah Larson, Jerry O's, Pina, all you guys out there, man. I'm sure you're going to do something next that's going to be even better than what you've done before. So appreciate you all and look forward to seeing you back in the content space. And as for you, Ant, talk to you next week, bud.
Later.
All right, guys, be back. Brand new show tomorrow. I'll talk to you then.